Welcome, everybody. We're so excited that you're here. It's great to see you all. And we're so excited that you're joining us for our Collaboratory Black Fertility Matters, Stories, Myths, and Resources from Community and Provider Champions. My name is Alexis Cobbins. I'm the Executive Director of the California Preterm Birth Initiative, as well as one of the co-chairs of the Women's Health Committee for the Delta Zeta Omega Chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. If this is your first event with the California Preterm Birth Initiative, we welcome you to join us every month at our Collaboratory series to think through and generate new ideas, collaborations, and innovative approaches to preventing preterm delivery and improving outcomes for babies born too soon. Next slide, please. We'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Ramaytush Ohlone elders, past, present, and future, who call this place, the land that UCSF sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Ramaytush Ohlone community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. Next slide, please. This month, our organizational highlight is a national organization based in Illinois and founded by one of our speakers today, Reverend Stacey Edwards-Dunn. It's called Fertility for Colored Girls. After numerous conversations with women who have walked the IVF journey, experienced challenges with infertility as well as miscarriages, sharing with women who decided to postpone pregnancy for whatever reason, recognizing women were suffering in silence and were unable to find a safe space to have safe conversations regarding infertility with family, friends, or at church, and realizing the Black community is not having real talk about infertility and reproductive health, Fertility for Colored Girls Incorporated was born. We encourage you to learn about how they are supporting Black women across the nation with education, awareness, encouragement, emotional support, and financial assistance. If you would like to learn more or donate with a gift of hope, the link is in the chat. Next slide, please. We would also like to recognize and thank the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, Delta Zeta Omega Chapter for their co-sponsorship of this event. They were instrumental in bringing this idea to PTBI, and we're so happy that we're collaborating and able to delve off into a new topic that hasn't been covered very much. So we thank them for their innovation and creativity with bringing this topic to the community. And with that said, I'd like to introduce a special guest, Selena Young. Selena Young is a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the oldest Greek letter organization established by African-American college women. She currently serves as the chapter president of Delta Zeta Omega Chapter in San Francisco, California. She leads a dynamic group of professional women who enthusiastically give their time, talents, and resources as they provide service to all mankind. Under her leadership, the chapter has garnered tremendous accolades, both regionally and internationally. Selena is a mentor to several undergraduates and also serves on an international committee within the organization. Professionally, Selena has 20 plus years of banking experience. Welcome, Selena.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alexis. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Selena Young, and I proudly serve as chapter president of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Delta Zeta Omega Chapter in San Francisco, California. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated was founded January 15th, 1908 on the campus of Howard University, a prestigious historical Black college and university. And we, the ladies of Delta Zeta Omega Chapter, was chartered on September 8th, 1946, and most recently celebrated 75 years of sisterhood and service in the San Francisco Bay Area. Since our sorority's inception, we have flourished globally to well over 300,000 college-educated members, bound by the bonds of sisterhood and empowered by our commitment to sisterhood and service to all mankind. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated continues to raise community awareness of critical issues impacting Black women in our overall community. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated is dedicated to implementing programs of service that enhance our social, economic stature around the world. Programs remain the heartbeat of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and the size and scope of our services provided to our communities have grown significantly over time. We are excited to collaborate with UCSF Preterm Birth Initiative on this very important topic to increase awareness about Black fertility concerns. As an elite African-American organization, it is important to us to provide these types of resources, whether it's educational webinars or workshops, to really make sure that we provide that service to all mankind on an ongoing basis. It is time to break our silence on Black fertility in our communities, and I hope each attendee leaves well-informed and have resources so that you can dispel the myths, because Black fertility matters. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and I am going to turn it back over to Alexis at this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Selena. So we have a great session planned today for you all. We'll be hearing from Reverend Stacey on her personal story and community advocacy, an acclaimed reproductive endocrinologist, Dr. Michael Thomas, and an experienced psychiatric nurse practitioner and fellow AKA member, Esther D. Ligon. Before we hear from our speakers, I want to introduce your incredible moderator. Tamika Parrish is currently a social worker for San Mateo County Medical Center, where she works in the emergency department and psychiatric emergency services. Tamika is a native of San Francisco, where she received her Bachelor of Arts degree in political science and English literature at St. Mary's College. She went on to pursue a master's in social work. Ms. Parrish is honored to moderate this webinar and being a part of educating the African American community. Thank you for being here today, Tamika.
Thank you, Alexis. I'm going to share just a quick story of how Alexis and I met. So I used to be a UCSF child about a year or two ago, and we met during our orientation. Even though I am with San Mateo County now, I still have my little UCSF cup, if everyone can see it. So I'm still there in spirit. But we have a wonderful, wonderful webinar for you all. And I'm just going to give you a little bit more information about our agenda. Today, we will start by hearing from Reverend Stacey and follow with a panel discussion to talk about support, resources, and structural solutions. We will then spend plenty of time answering your reproductive questions. I'll start with questions that the women of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Delta Zeta Omega Chapter has submitted. Then we will launch into our audience questions. So audience, get those questions ready. I'm looking forward to it. We will then go through and encourage everyone to submit their questions. We will go through the questions and answer as many as possible. Now I'd love to introduce Reverend Dr. Stacey Edwards-Dunn. She is a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority and the founder of Fertility for Colored Girls. She is a sought-out lecturer, preacher, and teacher, as she has ministered at various churches and institutions throughout the U.S. She has done in-depth work in community engagement, assisted churches in developing mission-focused organizational structures, as well as established herself as an expert in the field of fertility education and advocacy. As a result of her work, she has been blessed to publish a book entitled Hold On to Hope, Stories of Black Women's Fertility, Faith, and Fight to Become Mothers. She is the native of Muncie, Indiana. Dr. Edwards-Dunn is married to Earl D. Dunn Sr., and they are the proud parents of Shiloh, Sage, and Selah Dunn. Let's welcome Reverend Stacey.
Thank you so much, Tamika, and everyone. I'm so honored to be a part of this panel with all of these distinguished speakers. So thank you again for including me, as well as Fertility for Colored Girls. Ladies and gentlemen, for those who are watching, my story began in 2007. Not too long after I got married, my husband and I had moved very quickly to start our family. At that time, I was 37 years old. I did not think that I would have any challenges becoming a mother, but I would find out very differently as I went to see my OBGYN as well as a reproductive endocrinologist, who would soon diagnose me as infertile, particularly with unexplained infertility. I was flabbergasted, to say the least, as infertility was not a conversation that I had had amongst my girlfriends and my family. And I didn't even know that Black women could experience infertility. All I had been told was that, I'm sure what many of you have thought or have been told, is that Black women were hyperfertile, and that we don't have any problem with getting having children. Matter of fact, we look at each other and we're able to have babies, or someone dreams of fish in our community and we're told that we could have children, but that wasn't my case. And so as we sat in the doctor's office and the doctor diagnosed us with infertility, it also came with the price tag of $25,000 for this newly married couple. And we had no idea where that was going to come from. In addition to this diagnosis, again, it was extremely devastating. But we did not lose hope. We forged forward, and that began our fertility journey. We did everything by trial and error, as again, we didn't know anyone who really had been on this particular journey. And one of the things that I began to notice as I walked this journey was that, again, there was no place for women of color or people of color to have this conversation, or to have there was no safe space for us, and nor was there a place to receive education as I walk my journey. When I say I walk my journey, from the giving of myself shots, on the journey, early morning ultrasounds, failed in vitro cycles. I went through 6 IVF cycles before my own first success. But to still put a pin there, I proceeded on the journey. And again, I would find out that there was nowhere for Black women and couples to go. There were a few people at the time who were writing blogs, particularly around Black women and fertility, but there was no grassroots organization, no live organization that was meeting the needs of Black women and couples and other people of color who were struggling with infertility. And so as I began to move through my journey, I not only found that out, but I also, as a pastor, as the executive minister at a church, many of the parishioners began to come to me for counseling around infertility. And little did they know, I was struggling with infertility myself. And so as a result of my own encounters with these women, my own experiences, God led me to start Fertility for Color Girls in March of 2013. And at that time, I had just finished my 6th IVF journey, and my 6th failed cycle, let me say. And so when we started Fertility for Color Girls, women began to come out of the woodworks because there was no organization like this. And I thought we would just simply be in Chicago, Illinois. But little did I know, now 9 years later, we would be in 16 states across the country, because there is such a need for this type of organization amongst Black women and couples. And we are really the only organization that really is unashamed and unapologetic about serving Black women and couples who are struggling with infertility, miscarriage, or loss, and also trying to preserve their fertility. Fertility for Color Girls, our mission is to provide education, awareness, and support for Black women and couples on this journey. We provide educational programs, both live as well as virtual programs. We provide support groups now in 16 states across the country who are all meeting virtually if you need support. We also provide grant monies. We have a grant called a gift of hope that we provide each year, about $75,000, because we spend most of our time raising money to give it away, because treatment, adoption, or gestational carrier, or donor eggs, donor sperm, none of that is not cheap. And so, and there's only about 19 states in the United States that have fertility insurance to support those women and couples on the journey. So we spend all year raising money to give it away for women and couples who do not have the wherewithal to forge forward in building a family. We also have prayer circles on every Monday. We also partner with fertility clinics across the country, recognizing that medical distrust is a huge issue in our community. We spend a lot of time vetting fertility clinics to ensure that when we refer, or when women and couples come to those clinics, that they will be cared for rightly, and that they have someone that is planted on the inside to usher our women through the process, or our couples through the process, as they seek to build their families. In addition to that, in addition to those partnerships, we have partnerships with these fertility clinics who also have gifted us free in vitro cycles as well. And so those are some of the things that Fertility for Colored Girls does. We have been blessed to help over 200 women in the 9 years that we have been in existence to become parents via one path or another. I want to go back really quick as I close with my own story. In 2014, I finally was successful with my 7th in vitro, as I gave birth to my first daughter, who is now 7 years old, about to turn 8 years old. And her name is Shiloh Lupita Iman Dunn. God sent us our first daughter after that 7th in vitro cycle that my husband encouraged us to do for the last time. He said, I believe if we do it one more time, that we will get pregnant. And the Lord did bless us. And then 7 years later, actually this past November, I was blessed to, after 3 frozen transfers, I was actually blessed to get pregnant with at the age of 50, with a set of identical twins. And I just gave birth to them in November. They are now 7 months old. And I tell you, I would have never thought that I would be pregnant with twins at 50. But one thing I've learned on this journey is that God does everything perfect and well in God's time. And God sends children to us when God has signed them and God is ready for them to come. And so I am so very grateful to be the proud mother, along with my husband. He's the proud father of these 3 beautiful children, one who is 7, 2 very healthy little girls. And my pregnancy was better at 50 than it was at 43. But I am very honored to be the parents of these 3 beautiful little girls who have come through, my struggle with infertility. God blessed us with double for our trouble, and really triple for our trouble, as we have a 3-girl trio, a trio of girls around here who are ready to impact the world and live out their purpose. So if you need anything from Fertility for Colored Girls, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about resources as we move forward. But it's my prayer that my story does encourage you to not give up hope, and check out our book. As you can find out 28 more stories of women, particularly Black women, who have struggled with all types of infertility, but have become parents through one path or another. Because in vitro and IUI, as you will hear the doctors say, are not just the only paths to parenthood. There are multiple paths to parenthood, and none of those paths are deficient. They are just different. And God has assigned those who want to be to be a parent through one of those paths. And at the end of the path is a gift and a child. And you will not love that child any the less because of the path that you were chosen for to obtain the gift of the child.
Reverend Stacey, I'm over here tearing up. Well, I thank you for your truth. I thank you for your testimony. And I know we have spoken before we started this webinar, and you had given us your story. So you are really blessing so many people out there. I wish you could see the chat. And they're just saying, amazing. God is wonderful. What a word. Thank you for blessing us with your story. Another amazing, how incredible, what a powerful journey. And it is a journey. It is. And I thank you so much. I know you're going to get more business from from California, Northern California, after this webinar.
But we all about making babies and
That's right.
bringing babies in the life of building families. So we hope so. We hope we can
Yes.
support the women and couples in the California area. We do have an LA chapter, so we would love to come to San Francisco, to the Bay Area to start
Good.
as well.
Well, listen, I already have a plane ticket for you and the babies and the husband.
Okay, okay, I'll come it.
All right, so as we move on, we're going to move into our panel discussion. So again, to our audience, just remember, share any questions that come up for you in our Q&A box. Keep telling us, how you're feeling, and in our chat. We welcome everyone that is here. Continue to let us know how you're doing. Let me introduce you to our other two panelists, Miss Esker D. Lagon. She began her nursing career in 1998 and currently works as a psychiatric nurse practitioner for a large healthcare maintenance organization, Kaiser Permanente, in Vallejo, California. She has experience working in various treatment settings in the San Francisco Bay Area. Her areas of expertise include adult primary care, psychiatry, and addiction medicine. She doesn't freely disclose her history of reproductive health and infertility issues to clients. However, her experiences provide a unique frame of reference for her work with clients presenting with similar concerns. Ms. Lagon is a volunteer clinical professor at the UCSF School of Nursing. She possesses a passion for mentoring aspiring nurses and sharing information about ways to improve and maintain health for individuals and communities. Outside of work, she enjoys spending time with family and friends and is also a member in my sorority sister and my sister of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Ms. Lagon is the author of the book entitled Dirty Sidewalks and Beautiful People, a collection of quotes and reflections from my work in San Francisco's Tenderloin. We welcome Esker D. And I'm going to come back to you with a lot of questions. I've known Esker D for years, too many years to count, and I'm so excited that she is partnering with us and doing this today. Our next panelist is Dr. Michael A. Thomas. Dr. Thomas is the chair of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine. Dr. Thomas has been named one of the best doctors in America and one of Cincinnati Magazine's, best doctors for 21 consecutive years. He is nationally recognized as a leader in the field of assisted reproduction, has authored more than 120 scientific publications and book chapters, and currently serves or has served on a number of national committees, including the Society for Reproductive Endocrinology and Infertility, and many more. In addition, Dr. Thomas is the Director of Reproductive Medicine Research, a clinical research unit at the University of Cincinnati that is funded by federal and private institutions. His research interests include contraception, infertility, and the effects of environmental toxins on reproductive function. He has extreme experience in treating multifaceted infertility issues and endocrine disorders ranging from infertility, abnormal puberty, endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and menopause, as well as disorders of the thyroid and adrenal gland. I welcome Dr. Thomas. I know you have a wealth of knowledge. I'm so excited, as well as our audience, to hear from you. So now to start with our questions, I hope our panel is ready. I'm going to start. This is for everyone. This is open. We're talking about Black fertility today. Can you share from your experience or from what has come up through research about why we're specifically talking about Black fertility, especially when the face of fertility doesn't look like us? And I'm thinking about billboards, brochures, media, and oftentimes we don't see Black people. So Dr. Thomas, I'll start with you.
All right, that's a very good question. Thank you for the lengthy introduction. I thought it was my mother. And Reverend Stacey, my mother's one of her parishioners in Chicago.
Excellent.
So there's a lot of commonalities. You know what? In all the research we've done on fertility, particularly fertility in different types of women, we note that there's actually, Dr. Stacey, Reverend Stacey talked about the fact that it was thought that Black women were sort of hyperfertile, which is not the truth. Matter of fact, if you look at rates of in vitro fertilization in women of all ages, women of similar ages, women of similar weight categories, with women with similar diagnoses, actually the rates of fertility when you look at treatment is actually lower. That the rates are lower in Black women than in non-Black women. The rates are lower not only with in vitro fertilization, but all of our other parameters. And no one really knows why, because there's no research specifically in Black women. And that's one of the problems that we have. We just know that there are these things that we see related to associations, if you will, but that the rates of fertility and getting pregnant are actually lower in Black women when it comes to treatment and how they respond to treatment options. So therefore, there is a lot of misperception about Black women. So when Black people come and see their gynecologist, they may be put off for a year or two, and therefore it's harder for us fertility experts to get them treated.
Exactly.
Oh, keep trying. We'll give you some pills. We'll give you some. We'll give you this. We'll give you that. And also, so by the time they see a fertility expert, when they're finally referred to us, they may be a little older, over 35, over 40, when we know that the chances of getting pregnant are much, much lower, and the chances of miscarriage are much, much higher. So seeing a fertility doctor and being advised to see a fertility doctor sooner versus later is something that is not necessarily being advised in our African American population in particular, compared to the Caucasian population.
Very true. I agree with that. Just now I'm on my journey myself, and I have some excellent doctors treatment team, but you don't see a lot of doctors that look like us.
Right.
So we're not being told, as Reverend Stacey had said previously, we're not having the discussions, the talks early. We're talking about our career, we're talking about other things. And so when we're ready to start planning our family, it's like, oh, wait a minute, we're 35, we're 37, we're 40, now we're ready. So very true. So I'm going to go to Reverend Stacey now, the same question.
Could you restate the question?
Absolutely. I knew. I was like, let me read it again.
I was multitasking.
Yeah. Absolutely. So just if you can share your experience and thoughts for what's come up through research about why we're specifically talking about Black fertility, how we're not seeing the face of fertility that look like us, women of color, men of color, couples on billboards, brochures, as well as social media. Why is the need?
Well, again, as Dr. Thomas stated, and as I shared earlier, Black women couples have been seen as hyperfertile. And this has been, this conversation or this ideology stems way back even to slavery, right? Because even during slavery, the reality is that we were thought to be, these breeding myths, that we were brought here to be able to have babies after babies after babies for the economy, to build this economy. The more babies we had, the more we were able to care for the land and, make money for the slave master. And so it was imperative that, particularly around the ages of 12 to 14, that Black women, Black girls were able to start getting pregnant for that reason. And if we weren't, the reality is that this idea of being infertile, if a slave master thought that you were infertile, that the consequences was brutal treatment. And so no one wanted to be treated brutally. No one wanted to be treated or thought of as infertile, because it also meant that you could be sold off to another land, you could be killed. It was a number of things that could happen. And so I do believe that much of this has made its way. This thought process and ideology, it lingers in our community. Even amongst that, I think that also there's some miseducation from a biblical standpoint that we have also been taught about, our fertility. As well. Even from the very beginning, we could talk about it for hours. Genesis 1, that we were created to be fruitful and multiply. But when you really unpack that text, you'll find that it means more than having babies. It has to do with the condition of us being fertile in our lives, speaking life and being life wherever we go. And so I want to lay that foundation first. But when we also add on to that, when we begin to think about this idea that one wants to be infertile, what we've been taught in our communities and our churches, and then this idea of that if you're not fertile, then you're less than a woman. All of those things have led to shame in women and couples living in silence. And I also want to suggest too that we're talking about Black women, but the reality is, and I'm sure Dr. Thomas can say more about this as a medical doctor, but 50% of the cases of infertility also lie on men as well, because men are struggling with fertility challenges as well.
Good point.
So I think that it's very important to bring that into the space, that it's not always the woman that has the fertility challenges. Sometimes there can be male factor infertility as well. Absolutely. And so when we think about all of these things, Black women and couples have been living in silence because all of these things and so many more. And so as a result of us living in shame, living in silence, we don't seek access to care as a result of many of the fertility clinics not having Black faces on their marketing, on their websites, having Black babies, particularly. I'm talking about specifically for us. It could be other ethnicities, but we're talking about Black fertility matters. But because we don't see ourselves, we also sometimes don't think that it's a problem with us as well. And so, and nor do we think that the centers become welcoming to us. And I think in addition, I would like to add to that there's a lot of medical distrust in our community as well. And so we don't trust doctors. And so as Dr. Thomas spoke to us about the other day, there's only about 50 Black reproductive endocrinologists in the country. And so, and a lot of times Black women couples, when they come to us, they're looking for Black doctors. And so our goal, of course, is one, yes, if we can connect you with a Black doctor, we will. But we just want to get you in the hands of a good doctor.
That's right.
That is good for you. And that's going to care for you rightly and help you to obtain your goals. And so I think all of these things contribute. I think cultural things, there's some historical things, there's some spiritual and biblical things that contribute. It's very holistic. That's contributing to us, not accessing care. And then, as Dr. Thomas also stated, many of us are also going to see doctors later after we went to school, after we've started our, after we've gotten jobs. Some of us are looking for husbands, and we're finding that there are many unmarried women within the Black community, and so they feel like, I haven't found a husband, so I can't get pregnant. And then they change their minds and I'm going to start now. And then they're 42, 43, and then they get to the doctor, and the doctor is like, well, you may have to use donor eggs, and they don't want to use donor eggs. It's just so many things. So many, it's so complex. And so I think all of these things are contributing factors to our access. And I think that's why this type of forum is so important, because it gives us the opportunity to break the silence and for us to hear from doctors, advocates, and other persons who have been through, to know that we're not alone, and that there's other people that have walked this walk, but also who have been successful on the journey as well, and have hope and have support.
Very good points. And in the exposure, like having conversations, talking about it, that's the first step. So you brought up a good point, I mean, many good points, but as far as like getting a doctor, once we have the information, then there's questions we know to ask.
That's right.
And we can ask that of any doctor, regardless of what they look like, but having that information is so invaluable. Thank you. Now I'm going to ask Esker the same question.
And so I don't know if there's much more for me to say after Reverend Stacey. However, I will elaborate on a couple of points that she mentioned. One, the sense of people feeling like it's something that they haven't talked about. So there's very much the feeling of isolation. So I think it's very important to get the message out there, to let people know that this is not necessarily something that you have to be closed-mouthed about. Thinking back on my own experiences, and this was back in 2009 when people really first started jumping on social media. And of course, you haven't seen people, and people like to ask, oh, you don't have kids, when are you having kids? And I remember one day feeling particularly emotional and like putting a post up on social media, like, will people stop asking? And then I kind of said, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. But because of that post, there were a couple of friends who reached out to me that said, you know what, I've been dealing with similar issues and really didn't know where to go to get support and things of that nature. So sometimes we're holding on to things because of embarrassment, when really by sharing our story, we can help someone. The other issue that she touched upon was with it not just being a women's issue. It's involving the couple, and having encountered a couple of people who had a great sense of frustration because a lot of the issues that come up of feeling inadequate as a woman, just the frustration of like kind of wanting something and not being able to get it. One particular woman had been through a few cycles of intrauterine insemination. The people done multiple tests, had been to multiple providers to get reproductive health services, infertility treatments, and everyone telling her, we don't know why this isn't working. Well, years down the line, when her, unfortunately, she got a divorce and was looking over some of the paperwork, saw that the semen analysis results were abnormal. And so really having that wherewithal that why is it that these providers are uncomfortable talking to African Americans, kind of being realistic about it, and having this woman think that all the time it was her issue, when in fact that her husband's sperm sample had abnormalities. And so could have saved them time and money by trying to do these intrauterine inseminations and been realistic and said, you need to pursue IVF in this case. And so that's why I think it's really important for it really to be brought to the forefront of all of the different things that are involved in infertility. The last thing I will touch upon is the financial piece. That kind of goes hand in hand with the comfort level of clinicians talking to people of color. Recently having some experiences where it seemed like the first half of the appointment, the consultation, was focused on, oh, well, you know how much this is going to cost, and it's not inexpensive, and you know, to have to say to the person multiple times, you know, people have done their research. This is not their first time going through the process of having various consultations, and so having the awareness of how much it costs, but just seeming like very much that it was like kind of so much trying to say, yeah, I'll talk to you about it, but you're probably not going to be able to afford it. Without even kind of checking themselves to see, well, what is that person's career, how old that person may be, and like, you know, their level of financial stability. And so I think a lot of those things come into play. And so not just for people who are going through the infertility issues, but important for different providers to be aware of the fact that how they're coming across to people when they're doing these consultations.
Very good point. Good point that you hit on. And I'm glad how the panel you all have said that it's not just the women, but it's the men. Let's not forget the men. You know, you're doing it as a couple, and bringing that to the forefront. In the chat, Jeanette has stated, which is really good, also the psychological distress and emotional turmoil that we have to deal with. She says it just takes the best of us. There's a lack of support training in our mental health system when dealing with fertility issues. And Jeanette, we will definitely cover that too, about the mental health component. So Esker D, I'm gonna stick with you, and I'm gonna ask you this question. As a psychiatric nurse practitioner, you've helped many people through difficult situations. After people have experienced loss of miscarriage, stillbirth, or just having gone through extensive fertility treatments, how do we cope or start again? Second question, what are strategies for community support that you've used in your practice to support Black people, especially when there can be been stigma or shame? So kind of just what you were talking about the stigma and shame and just exploring that.
So the one thing that I'll start off with at the second part of the question is that it is often very frustrating because you have difficulty finding resources to provide people with that type of emotional support that they need in the community. And that's regardless of ethnicity. That there may be kind of groups here and there, but it's not anything that it's like really widespread to say, oh, if you're experiencing issues with this type of loss, if you're struggling with infertility issues, this may be something that you could attend in a community. A lot of what people are resorting to is kind of online support groups. And I say that's kind of been more widespread in recent years. However, kind of for like over a decade, it's been a scramble to try to connect somebody with resources. With the impact of it psychologically, just as one of the people commented, there can be a lot of feelings of depression, feelings of shame, anxiety, and then the sadness that comes along with it. I don't think a lot of people appreciate the fact that there's a sense of grief and loss around infertility issues in general. And it's often something that people don't have the words for. So they feel like they can't talk to anyone because they don't feel anyone will understand.
Exactly.
Because it's a sense of, I've had multiple people come in and say, you know, it's really hard to explain to my sister that I can't come to her baby shower, that although I'm happy for her, I'm sad for myself. And so I don't want to come and be triggered. So there are things like that that happen, that people are feeling isolated from their family. They're not wanting to go out and socialize because people are well-intended, but they don't understand how hurtful it is for people to constantly ask them, when are you going to have children? Oh, you haven't had a baby yet. What are you guys waiting on? And even when they know that you've been through kind of having fertility issues, when people say, well, why don't you consider adoption? Or if you're not actively receiving treatments, and people say, well, you know, when you stop trying, that's when things will happen. And it's kind of like the rebuttal sometimes to people is, well, how is me not having sex going to help me to have a baby? Because they don't realize at that point in time, you're just looking at natural family planning options. So every time you say that you're in the process of trying to conceive doesn't necessarily imply treatments. And so a lot of times there's a sense of stigma there. Some of it is kind of turned on oneself, but also in the community, that there's just this lack of understanding. And people don't realize the kind of stress and how kind of jarring it is for people to say those type of things. In particular, when the option of, well, you know, why don't you pursue adoption? Because how it's heard to people is, you might as well just give up. And so there can be a lot of psychological changes that come about. And often when I'm seeing people, there's been a few instances where that was the sole purpose, that someone was coming in for an appointment because of the depression that was associated with that. But often they mention it as something that's kind of secondary, which I see as being kind of problematic, which often happens in instances where it deals with some women's health issues or kind of responses to the kind of the issue of infertility, is that it's not given, and I don't want to say it's minimized, but it's not really put in the forefront. And so I think people have taken this on as their identity, that there's somebody that has infertility issues. And so it falls to the kind of the back burner. And so they could have other issues going on, and then and I've been dealing with infertility. And so having dealt with some of the issues myself, I don't necessarily disclose that. But when I see someone struggling to kind of explain, or they're explaining the situation and they kind of seem squeamish. Oh, am I making sense? Yes, it makes sense because I've experienced some of those same feelings myself kind of years ago when I've gone through the process. So it kind of gives me that added insight. But one of the things that I like to tell people, one is just to be kind to themselves. To explain, it doesn't mean that something is wrong with you.
Right.
Doesn't mean that you're less of a woman, because this is not happening, and that there can be multiple things. There can even be issues with their partner, for example, that come into play. But also just letting people know that it's okay for them to have these feelings. I think people are often made to think that they shouldn't be upset about it, that they should just accept it and then somehow move on. But it is okay to feel these feelings of grief and loss. In particular, when there's been a miscarriage. Because there are some people that say, you know, they just feel like they're being ridiculous, especially when they've lost the child early on, and kind of to let people know that, no, this is okay to grieve this loss. There was a life, there's a loss of it, it's okay to grieve. You don't have to be ashamed of it. And so really trying to find a person the resources. It's not the typical grief and loss resource. Some people have gone to grief groups and come back and said, I really didn't feel like I fit there because of what other people were talking about. And so to kind of find something specific is often the challenge with finding something that's accessible to people and that's something they feel comfortable with. But I'd say then there's the added piece of being within the African-American community where there's the stigma around mental health issues. And that often people will like to tell you, oh, just give it some time and you'll be okay. And it's not always a give it some time, be okay thing. In particular, when we're dealing with reproductive health, women, I love us. We are able to create life. We're able to do so many wonderful things, so many fantastic things about being a woman. However, physiologically, biologically, our bodies are quite complicated. And so with reproductive health issues, as much as I hated to admit it years ago when I found out this information was true, sometimes our hormonal fluctuations affect the brain chemistry that comes into play with depression and anxiety disorders. And so it's not always just you're overreacting. Oh, why am I feeling this way? There are some fluctuations going on in your neurochemistry that may be affecting your mood and your anxiety level. And so it's really something that needs to be paid attention to. And there's nothing wrong with it. If you were having physical pain, then you would go and get that treated. So all in the same way, this emotional, psychological pain needs to be dealt with.
Good point. Good point.
I'd say that's the main thing, is just creating space for people to talk about it and validating their feelings about it. And I'm trying to think if there was one more point.
Well, we can come back to it because you don't have some more questions.
The last thing that I'm going to say is there actually have been studies done on the impact of grief and loss for miscarriages and abortions even. That there's a grief and loss process. And so it is very much a valid, valid concern when people present with it.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to go back to Reverend Stacey. Can you now share what resources you would recommend for women? For example, like you were discussing fertility grants, peer support groups, hotline, any other resources as well?
Absolutely. There are a number of support groups that are available. I, of course, always recommend, I'm biased, Fertility for Colored Girls, one of our 16 support groups. All of our support groups are peer-led. Each one of our peer leaders are trained. to lead those support group meetings. And those support group meetings are specifically for women of color, African-American women, and our peer support group, and men are, because we have men, husbands, or partners to attend our meetings as well. But they have all been trained to meet women and couples right where they are, no matter where they are on the journey, whether they're struggling with miscarriage or loss, or they're trying to forge forward to build their families. We meet everybody where they are, or if they're making a decision, because another choice that we often don't talk about is some women choose not to have children at all. And so I think that we have to be, we have to be honest about that as well. But our support groups are very safe. We do not critique or judge, but we meet people where they are to walk with them on their journey. In addition to that, there are multiple grants that are available. Again, in addition to Fertility for Color Girls that offers a gifts of hope each year. Even right now, if you need of financial support, Fertility for Color Girls has just partnered with RMA Network. RMA Network has just given Fertility for Color Girls 5 free in vitro cycles. And so that application is now open till August 1st. You can find out more about that on our website. Also, if you go to our website, we have a list of 50 grants that also support not only IVF, treatment, adoption, gestational surrogacy, as well as donor egg, donor sperm. So all paths to parenthood, you can find out about those grants on that particular website. I do want to say something about the Fertility for Color Girls grant, that our grant is the only grant that has raised the age limit. And so most of the grants, they stop providing for women around the age of 43, particularly if you're going through IVF. But our grant, we are at right now at the age of 47 for women and couples, and there probably will be increased because we realize that women and couples are accessing care and making decisions to become parents at a much later time. I'm sorry for the background noise.
No, that's okay.
So you have those grants that are listed on our website. In addition to that, Cade Foundation is located in Baltimore. They also, who is started by a Black woman, they provide support for women and couples of all ethnicities. They too give grants away for those. She is a member of, Camille Hammond is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. Her mother, Camille, struggled with endometriosis, and her mother ended up giving birth to her triplets at the age of 50 years old.
I think I read that. There was an article on that. Yes.
Yes.
That's
so,
amazing.
She's an awesome advocate, and she's doing great work in this field as well. And so, and their grant is still open too. So if you're looking for support, please check out that as well. In addition to that, I just saw somebody wrote about acupuncture. You know, it's good. Acupuncturists are good. Doesn't promise a successful pregnancy, but it can help you relieve stress and to kind of mellow out a little bit as you're going through this. Also, exercising, good diet, making sure that you have a good nutritionist so that you have a really good foundation if you're going through treatment as well. And then also that you're meditating or you have a good prayer life to give you some sense of peace, because this journey is not for the faint in heart, but it's, again, very, very important that you're pouring into yourself spiritually, mentally, emotionally, as well as physically when you are on your journey. So I would suggest those. If you are interested in any of our support groups, again, email ffcghope@gmail. You all see my husband with a pen right behind us. He's trying to hold it down while I'm but please email us. Please email us. And we will connect you to our support groups. You can also follow us on Facebook. We have a secret group on Facebook where these women, every day of the week, they talk about where they are in their journey. They buddy up with each other in cycles, or if they're looking for gestational carriers, they walk with each other. Those who have utilized gestational carriers, those who have used donor eggs, donor sperm, they are, they become buddies as well. So it's, again, we have multiple safe spaces for you to walk this journey with, and for you to realize, again, that you are not alone, and that there is hope, and that, that there are people here to support you if you are on this journey.
Thank you, Reverend Stacey. That's going to be the theme throughout this webinar, is that we are not alone. You are not alone. We have to remember that. If we don't remember anything, remember that. And please, audience, I hope you are taking great notes. We are going to drop this information in the chat. So please pick it up.
And Ms. Parrish, real quick,
Yes.
somebody did just drop in the chat too that employers offer fertility grants. Some do. Some also, of course, you know, there's 19 states that offers insurance. There's also employers that support adoption as well. They give, you know, grants or a certain amount of money, allotments for, you know, for adoption as well. And so what we also encourage you to do is, if your employer doesn't, we encourage you to have conversations with your employer, with your HR departments about this type of support. Many mountains have been moved because women have approached their employer and said that women need this type of support, you know, as employees and, you know, and couples as well. So I encourage you, even at my job right now, we do offer, my church offers insurance and support for fertility, but we're also now in the process of putting together policies together for, you know, around paternity leave, maternity leave, new paternity, maternity leave, also leave for women who have experienced stillbirth and miscarriage. But it's because I approached the employer and said, this is something that we need to do. I say that to you. Yes, I say that to you who are watching as well. Approach your, have the courage and be brave enough to, you know, to advocate for yourself, as well as other people who will come behind you. And finally, also, in addition to that, I think that we can't leave, we have to put on the table the conversation of egg preservation for younger women as well. It's very important that young women consider, particularly Black women that don't know anything about freezing eggs, that we begin to have some conversation about that, because egg preservation is insurance for young women. If I would have known a long time ago that I could freeze my eggs, I would have tried, but I didn't know. But now that we know, egg freezing is an opportunity, even egg donation, and even how you can help somebody else and also benefit as well. White women do it all the time, are donating their eggs to help women, making $60,000 to $80,000, sometimes $150,000 in their lifetime. So we want to encourage our young Black women to do the same, because they can help themselves as well as help somebody else.
Good point. Thank you, Dr. Stacey. All right, Dr. Thomas. So again, we've heard that you are a part of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine Task Force, seeking ways to increase access to infertility care for people of color. What sorts of structural solutions or policy changes have come out of that task force? And what can we do, again, on a structural intervention as providers, researchers, and advocates?
Well, first of all, I want to just echo and thank Dr. Reverend Stacey and Ms. Escudé about the comments that they've made. You know, to be honest with you, Ms. Escudé is one of the first African-American psychiatric folks in the mental health field space in the fertility field that I've met, to be perfectly honest with you. And I've been in the space since 1988.
We're making moves already.
And there's so many great specialists in the field. There are two people in your area, in the San Francisco area, Bay Area, Dr. Colin Schmeichel and one of my former partners, Dr. Marcel Cedars, who are great folks who've done great work in that area and have been very beneficial in getting our field to where it is. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine has been around since the late 40s. It is the premier fertility organization that helps to train doctors and has a patient area on the website asrm.org. I'll be the first African-American president starting in October. We're going to have a big blowout next October in New Orleans. It'll be something that you've never seen before. We are a group of, it's an organization that monitors and tells us what to do. So a task force was put together related to the fertility space, and we looked at two different charges, and I was the chair of this task force. And the first thing was to see that we know that there aren't a lot of African Americans in not only as providers, as mental health specialists, as lab people. There just aren't a lot there. I know when I was coming up, there were only 5. Now there are about 50 to 60. And when I came in, I was discouraged because they're saying no one's going to pay $5,000 or $10,000 for you. Just go deliver babies like you're supposed to do. But that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in space. I thought that there was a room for an African American voice and an African American provider. And so we need to actually look at who's there now. How many African Americans do we have in the psychiatric space? How many African Americans do we have in the lab? How many African Americans nurses do we have in this space? And how many African American providers? We don't even know. And so we're trying to gather that information. You can't increase something that you don't know about that much. We know
Exactly.
there are about 50 docs. We need to look at not only recruitment, but one of the things that I do is to try to go to my middle school in a place called Robbins, Illinois, which is just south of Chicago. The only people that I know from there, myself, Dwayne Wade, and Kiki Palmer. Other than that, they're very good.
Great.
There. We need to go back to our middle schools, not just the medical schools, but the middle schools, and try to encourage people to go into this reproductive health space. So trying to also do outreach. And on the access to care end, we need to make sure that there are more mandated states. Illinois is a state where providers have to give fertility coverage if they have more than 5,000 employees. So if you have enough employees, you have to give space. For the only 14 states, and California isn't one of them right now, 14 states that mandate fertility coverage. And trying to increase the number of mandated states is very important because that's the only way you're going to be able to get people the coverage that they need. And
very true.
Reading in the chats, fertility is very important. A lot of people don't know that there are these abilities through grants to get some fertility coverage. A lot of people don't know the fact that as Reverend Stacey said, half the time it's a male problem, half the time it's a problem potentially related to the female. There's so much education that needs to go on from a patient standpoint that we just don't have enough of our general OBGYNs or internal medicine people who are educated to tell their patients what to do and to get them in the right space. And the only way we're going to decrease the cost is, to be honest with you, is to try to get more of these states to mandate coverage. And the way to decrease the cost is for us as fertility docs to try to lower the cost as much as possible and offer
very true
pro bono services, or to offer services that should be mandatory parts of the things that you do. And we have people like RMA that Reverend Stacey talked about, and even our space in our area, there are a couple of places where we are trying to work with people to decrease the cost of fertility. But increasing the mandates, making sure that we are offering low-cost services, those are the things that sort of came out of this ASRM task force. And we're working diligently. Matter of fact, we're all going to meet in Chicago to talk about the next steps and getting some of these recommendations on the table, and to make sure that we are having the resources and having the availability of resources out there for everyone.
Yes, thank you very much. Because again, we go back to exposure, education, and having discussions about this. So now, we can go for hours. I wish this was an all-day webinar. How about that, a training? So just looking at the time, and I want to be mindful, I'm going to ask some questions. We have a lot of the audience that have asked questions in our Q&A, as well as questions that were submitted by members of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, Delta Zeta Omega Chapter. So I'm going to go kind of in between. And panel, if we can take 1 to 2 minutes. I know that's very hard in answering the questions. So one question that was posed, it said, what concerns should we have over 35 regarding reproductive health? What should you be asking for your provider? And is 35 the appropriate age as a cutoff? And that's for anyone.
I could say that, as Reverend Stacey said, you have to be fluid. It's true that fertility starts to change drastically. If you look at the numbers and the number of eggs you have, when we get our AMH level. AMH is the anti-Müllerian hormone level, which has been very useful for us to figure out how much there is there. It's not like you don't have it over the age of 35. It just starts to rapidly decrease over the age of 35. But it doesn't mean that 35 isn't a death knell, but it just tells us that we want to try to work as aggressively, which is why when you look at the definition of infertility, is 1 year if you're under 35, if you've been trying and having regular cycles, and 6 months over the age of 35. But also that definition doesn't include our LGBTQ plus community, because if you have a female-female couple, they're not being exposed to sperm for a year or 6 months. And that definition of infertility is what all of the insurance companies look at. And we are in many ways subjecting our couples, our same-sex couples, to not have the same benefits that other people may have because of the definition isn't as inclusive as it should be. And that's one of the other things that on our task force we wanted to make sure that we recommend, and to make sure that we are inclusive not only of race and ethnicity, but inclusive of sexual preference.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question. What is recommended for someone who has one ovary, a low ovarian reserve from endometriosis, and has been through IVF 2 times? When should they think about donor egg? And this is for anyone. Or Dr. Thomas.
Happy to answer that. As Reverend Stacey said, sometimes it takes more than once or twice for that miracle to take place. And at some point, you have to figure out in your own mind with your provider, if that provider is being straight with you, because you're absolutely right. Finding an African-American provider. My discussion with my African-American patients was probably a little bit different than my discussion with my Caucasian patients. With my discussion with my African-American patients, we're laughing, we're talking, we're doing a lot of different things. We have some commonalities. And my general feeling as a provider is to let the patient tell you what the problem is. Let them talk. Carve out that time. This isn't a factory work. Carve out that time for that patient to actually tell you about their journey and tell you what their story is. And I think that one of the things that we have to do a better job of is just being good listeners when we talk about the patients. But when it comes to endometriosis can be a very bad disease. And endometriosis, there are these little antibodies and antigens that attack sperm and attack eggs. And I think that 2 times of IVF cycle may not be enough. I think if your AMH is very, very low and you can't stimulate the ovaries, or if you've gone through IVF at least 3 times and you still aren't able to get pregnant, and those are possibly the times to think about trying to consider donor egg as an option. But as Reverend Stacey says, sometimes it may take more than a few times to get there. And you have to be there mentally in order to actually accept the fact that that donor egg may be the best option.
Good point. Thank you.
Our next question. Can I add real quick that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very important. I said earlier that there's multiple paths to parenthood. I think one of the things I try to encourage the women and the couples that come our way is to really be open and to know your options. And because there are multiple options available for us and multiple paths to parenthood. And so we have to be open, because again, none of our paths to parenthood are the same. They are different, but they're not deficient. And so, but the end goal is the same. There's options, and the end goal is to become a parent. And so there is, when we talk about donor eggs and donor sperm, and even moving forward adoption for some people, as Dr. Esker talked about earlier, there is some grieving that has to go with that as well, because oftentimes we have already made up in our mind how the path that we want to become parents, because that's how we've been educated all our lives, that there's one way. And so sometimes we have to grieve and deconstruct so that we can reconstruct and understand that there again are multiple paths to parenthood, and neither path, again, is not deficient. It's just different. And at the end of this path, this baby that's at the end of the path, whether it's through IVF, IUI, getting pregnant, what we call traditionally, or through becoming a parent through adoption, or becoming a parent with gestational carrier, using donor eggs, donor sperm, or embryo donation, whatever path, when you get to the end of that path and you get that child, you are not going to love that baby the less. You will love that baby because that is your baby. And that is the baby that God has assigned to you. And so, and I have never, and I'll say this and I'll close. I know I had 2 minutes. So the last 2
That's all right.
is that with all the women that I have worked with Fertility for Colored Girls, and the couples and LGBT couples that I work with Fertility for Colored Girls in the 9 years, because next year is our 10th anniversary.
Excellent.
The women, each one of them have, these people have been through all of these paths. Most of them, by the time they do become parents, whether it's with gestational carrier, making their mind up to use a donor, they ask themselves, what took me so long to make this decision? And so, because they love this baby, all the more. And, they don't love the baby any the less.
Excellent. Thank you. So I have a question. This is from Ruth in Berkeley, California. She says, if donor sperm eggs are used, is it a challenge finding sufficient Black donors? She says, I'm assuming that most Black individuals experiencing infertility would prefer sperm or eggs from Black donors.
I can tell you that that is true, that there aren't enough Black donors for donor eggs or donor sperm. And it's a problem in the fertility industry. And a lot of people end up using dark complected Italian folks or people who are of other ethnicities in order to have their child. If you look through most sperm banks, it's very difficult to find an African or American egg or sperm. And we try to encourage people, and I think because of 23andMe and all of these other things, because people can potentially track you down, that's also pushing people away from donating their eggs and sperm, because they may want to do it as an altruistic thing, or they get some small amount of money for it, but there aren't enough, but we should encourage it more, and we need to make sure that people understand this is a good thing to do. But we have a lack of African American donors in all areas of donation, where there's kidneys and anything else that we do. So it sort of follows that pattern.
Thank you.
If you are looking for more African American donors, you will find more in cities like Atlanta, more like in Charlotte, where it's a little bit more saturated with African Americans. It's a few more there than in many of our other areas. But as Dr. Thomas stated, there's not, there are a lack of, just like in every other area. And we have a lot of, just as we do around fertility or infertility, we have a lot of work to do around egg donation and helping people to really understand that as well.
Thank you. This is from Kayla Mann. She asks, for those who have decided to wait to have children until later in life, what are the questions they should ask or considerations they should keep in mind as they try to craft the best health journey for them and be prepared for later in life pregnancy?
Well, I would say, Ms. Esker, would you want to answer that?
I would say the one thing is to really look at your options. If you're realizing later in life, take into consideration that at a certain point, there is a cutoff for you being able to use your own eggs at most of the reproductive health centers. And so really finding out what that is and taking into consideration if you want to freeze eggs. So that if you're doing that later in life, you have your eggs and you don't run into those type of barriers. They can very much feel like the door is being shut in your face. And then I'll let you go ahead.
As of now, we don't have necessarily a cutoff if you're using your own eggs. And we sometimes encourage people to consider not only using their eggs, but also using potentially fertilizing some with donor sperm, because embryos, fertilized eggs are more likely to thaw versus just eggs alone. And you have to look at, there is a mathematical equation, so to speak. It takes about 8 to 10 eggs to get one good blastocyst, which is the fertilized egg that we transfer, because some eggs aren't going to thaw, some eggs aren't going to continue to grow. Therefore, just don't say, I froze 10 eggs, that's going to cover me the rest of my life. You have to understand 8 to 10 eggs is good for possibly one transfer. And I think that's happened to some people who froze eggs many years ago when the technology was just coming up. They froze their eggs, they're now in their 40s, they want to get pregnant, they go through a thaw, nothing thaws. And they are not left with anything available. So I think most centers are going to say, freezing your eggs is great, but freeze enough so that you can have them for the future. Because if you may not ever use them, but it's better to have something, a younger version of you in some ways, than to have nothing. And I think that it's very important to have these very deep conversations about what you want to do, and the fact that it may take more than one time to go through a procedure in order to get the number of eggs that you need.
Good point.
And I'd like to add that I'd like to add really quickly that I encourage everybody to always do a fertility status check. It is nothing wrong with you going out to find, going to find out what your ovarian reserve is like, making sure you get your uterine cavity checked to find out, how that's looking, making sure your fallopian tubes are open or that you got both fallopian tubes. We go for annual exams, but they do not do that in-depth work. And I think that, I went for all my annual exams, once it was time, but because I did not have that type of extensive checkup, I never knew that I had one fallopian tube, and I did not find out until I was almost 34 years old. And the technician missed it when I did have all of my pre-exams before moving into, my fertility journey. And so I encourage women to be proactive and be assertive and get those things done to make sure there's no fibroids in the uterine cavity, those types of things, because Black women in couples, Black women experience fibroids at 7 and 8 times higher rates than any other community. And we're also experiencing fibroids at much earlier ages. Some young girls at age 12 years old, we're seeing are having fibroids. So I think that it's very important that we have fertility status checkups, to make sure that everything is going okay. In addition to that, making sure that you have a good diet, that you're taking care of your body. You have, again, a good foundation, and you're pouring good stuff into your system. And so that this idea of preparation, that we're preparing our bodies for the time to come, in addition to what Dr. Thomas and Dr. Esker talked about, doing egg preservation as well.
And such a good point too, when you had mentioned holistically. We've all talked about our mental health, our emotional health, our physical health, what that looks like, because it's encompassing, and it's really important. So the panel, everything that's going on in the news with Roe versus Wade and the overturning, how might this affect fertility options and treatments?
Well, I would tell you that's a big concern, and I think that I've been on a bunch of email strings just in the state of Ohio, because the state of Ohio has had some very draconian laws that have kicked in since last week. One of the biggest concerns is the definition of conception. If the definition of conception, if the definition of a child is at the time of conception, that's not necessarily good for us, and we need to fight against that. So that means that if we freeze eggs, we're going to be okay. But if we ever freeze embryos, that those embryos may be thought of as being not treated well if they're frozen, or they may not necessarily be able to be transferred, or if you have embryos that are found not to be the healthiest embryos. For example, if you have embryos that have been checked and they have a lethal issue that may affect the child later on, those embryos may not necessarily be allowed to be discarded. So there are a lot of implications. It'll be on a state-by-state basis. I know that Oklahoma has been one of the states that have been of concern. I know that Kentucky is starting to come up with laws that are trying to affect the ability to freeze embryos, which means that They may not allow freezing of embryos. They may not allow discarding of embryos that aren't of the type of embryos we would want to transfer from a medical standpoint. And so we are, as a community, fertility community, trying to fight any laws that would impede a fertility patient to want to use her frozen embryos or to want to get pregnant at a time when she would want to get pregnant with the healthiest baby possible.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Esker, I'm going to ping that question to you as well, and then I'll ping it to Dr. Stacey.
There are, I think, so many, it's really a scary time because there's no telling what can come from this.
Yeah.
So one thing that I've been seeing recently that I won't say I'm most concerned about it, that I have a heightened concern about is everyone trying to stock up on abortion pills and morning after pills. One of the things that I've seen in recent years I've been concerned about is kind of these long-term contraceptive options and not seeing as much focus on education around the potential for sexually transmitted infections and things of that nature. And so the fact that people are saying, let me run out and get these, it's kind of where there's a little bit of a disconnect there. It's kind of like, well, what are some other options to look at? Certainly not wanting to kind of inhibit people from any sexual practices, but are we doing things safely? And looking at the implications for people using these modalities of treatment without the proper medical consultation because they're afraid of it. Or not knowing if there's any contraindications or any health risks associated with it, and how does that mentally going to affect people if they use one of these treatments and they have complications. And so I'm kind of looking at it from that perspective. Is the kind of what are we setting ourselves up for down the line with people being afraid to access healthcare. And then I'd say one of the other things as it pertains to kind of looking at the conversation in general about fertility is the lack of education that people have about their bodies in general. And so really just for people, I'm hoping it's an opportunity for there to be more education about it. One thing that I didn't mention is just the stigma sometimes that people have. That if someone's had abortion, that probably that's the reason that they're not able to conceive. And that's incorrect. Because people have had multiple children, they've had tens, some people up to 20 children. And that losing your uterine lining is not going to affect your ability to conceive again. And so just looking at kind of how that pertains to the whole big picture of things.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately with this whole Roe v. Wade thing, it's all about control. It's all about mostly men, white men who are trying to control what women can and cannot do. And I truly feel that we are at a time where if we don't have loud voices to try to counteract any of these types of things, it is going to be to our detriment. So trying to fight, because there's a huge hypocrisy. When I was a resident in Detroit, we had the head of Right to Life in another community come bring his daughter up for her abortion. And so it's not that, you talk to these people privately, they say one thing, when they're out in the public, they say something else. The hypocrisy, unfortunately, affects Black women and poor women more so than it affects someone who can just take off from Ohio and go to Chicago or go to California to have a pregnancy termination. It's not anything that anybody wants to do, but in those circumstances, you shouldn't be able to tell a person what they can and cannot do with their body. And it's up to us to continue to fight that fight because it's so hypocritical. And this fight doesn't just affect women who are pregnant, it also affects women who have fertility issues as well. It's going to affect women who just want to use a birth control pill, who just want to use IUD. These are not isolated incidents, and we can't let one thing happen because the next thing will happen next.
Thank you so much, panel. And on that note, this has been kind of one of the most powerful discussions, personally, I feel, that is long overdue. I hope the audience feels the same energy that I have felt even moderating. Again, we can go on, and I know Dr. Thomas, Reverend Stacey, Esker, you all will be utilized as an excellent resource. So I thank you personally and professionally for the work that you do every day, going in, talking to people that look like us and representing our community and our field. So thank you again. I'm going to pass it to Alexis to close us out.
Thank you, everyone. That was an amazing panel. Amazing questions were asked by the audience. So thank you for your participation. And so to wrap up, we'll end on a call to action. So at PTBI, we want to make sure that people on this call can get connected to each other if there's not already a support group resource in your area. We have an optional form for anyone to fill out if they'd like to continue the conversation with people who are local to their area. After we receive all the responses, we will reach out to connect people based on geographical location and share any resources from those locations. The link to the form is in the chat. Finally, I'd love to hear each one of our panelists share one call to action they would like to leave our audience with. Let's start with Dr. Thomas.
You know, I'll say something and repeat something that was in the chat. We can't let the Supreme Court practice medicine without a license. I think that having these as legal issues when you're talking about the relationship between the doctor and the patient, we can't allow legal matters to affect our ability to practice and discuss things with our patient as a physician. Preserving that doctor-patient relationship is just so important, because if you don't try to preserve it, many more and many worse things are going to happen in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Let's hear from Esker D.
My main thing is use your voice. Whether it's sharing your story, whether it's advocating, whether it's holding space for someone who is dealing with some of these issues, your voice is very powerful. If it's even with advocating for policy change, making sure to use your voice. That's my call to action.
Thank you. And Reverend Stacey.
My call to action is to hold on to hope, and to hold on to that hope whether it's via voting, by advocating, as everyone says, advocating for yourself and advocating for someone else. And really supporting one another as we walk through not only this fertility journey, but also with everything that is going on in our country. Our country is in a state of emergency. And what we have seen just in the last week is not only did they came for Roe versus Wade, they gave more gun rights they extended made sure people had more gun rights. Also, the way that they the lack of support they gave prisoners, all in 1 week. And so they came for that in 1 week, you all. And so they are not finished. They started with Roe versus Wade and these things. Next, if we do not stand up, use our voices, and really hold on to hope and steep ourselves into the strength of our ancestors, they are also coming for civil rights. They're coming for housing rights. They're coming for rights of LGBTQ. They're coming for voting rights. They're coming for everything. And so it's pertinent and it's imperative that we come together as an inclusive community to stand up for our rights and support each other so that everyone can be treated with dignity, have quality healthcare and reproductive healthcare, and also have body autonomy, and also protect their privacy rights as well. So I say hold on to hope, stand firm, don't give up, keep the faith, and remember that Black fertility does matter too.
Thank you all so much for sharing your calls to action. Thank you to our audience for joining us today. A special thank you for Alpha Kappa Alpha Alpha Delta Zeta Omega Chapter for collaborating with us on this Collaboratory. We will be, please click the link if you want to be connected to resources. We will be closing the Zoom webinar now. We hope you learned something new today and can bring this energy with you forward for the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, panel.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.